Okay, I think we are streaming. I expected to see Eve in the session, but I see he cannot join. So, good morning, everybody. I want to introduce you. I'm Sandro Delia, working for the European Commission in the session in the unit working on dealing with digital innovation hubs. I want to introduce you my colleagues, Katarzyna Kasia Pieszuka and Elizabeth Meindl. They are both from the DG Competition, that is the area of the European, the Directorate General of the European Commission dealing with the state aid. And Matthias Quom is a colleague of my unit, and also Yves Pandavane, which just arrived, is the head of sector in the same unit, expert in digital innovation hubs. Okay, this is a question and answer session. So we ask you to use the Q&A section on the right of your screen to ask questions. In the meantime, in the previous session, in the general session on the state aid, we received lots of questions. So I don't know if Kasia or Elizabeth, you want to start looking at one of those things that I sent you by email and start answering to introduce the team.
So maybe as introductory remarks, if some of you did not participate in the previous session, Elizabeth and myself, we work with state aid rules for R&DI, environment, employment, and our colleagues also work on important projects of common European interest. So the state aid solutions we are proposing are based on GBER provisions specific for R&DI support. One of the questions you have asked was about the whether the 50% co-investment that comes from the member state, the half of it has to be provided by private participation. So the solution, I think, the basis for our discussion should be the solution we have been discussed with DigiConnect colleague, which is about the support that is granted for EDIHs being transferred down to SMEs. So we do not consider that any state aid in this scenario, that any state aid will be present at the level of EDIHs as such, but all of it will have to be transferred to the SMEs. And the aid will be the difference between the market price, which normally would have to be charged to the SME, and the actual price that the EDIH is charging. And there, the aid intensity that you will have to apply will depend on the rules that you decide to apply at the level of the SMEs. And as we explained during the previous sessions, there are a number of possibilities, yes? There is the famous Article 28, which covers innovation aid for SMEs. It has this famous 200,000 euro cap, which allows to grant an aid intensity of 100% to an SME, provided the 3-year period is respected. You can also grant the 50% aid intensity, yes, which is a possibility under this article. And there, normally, you would have to seek private co-investment.
Well, there is a question, a very specific question about this. Where it is. Is there an obligation, from Alexandra Stoker, is there an obligation for an EDIH to have 25% private co-financing and 25% of public funding under Article 27? Maybe you can better explain.
Yes. So Article 27 is about as regards financing for European digital innovation hubs. We have discussed application of Article 27 in a situation where there will be an amount of aid remaining at the level of the Digital Innovation Hub. So, for example, you could investment aid provisions for innovation clusters would then be applicable. And normally, state aid rules covered by Article 27 cap the maximum state aid support at 50% of eligible investment costs. So the remaining would have to be financed normally by private investors. As you know, however, if the Digital Europe program would be used to finance the same costs, you would, what is relevant in that situation is to respect the state aid accumulation rules, which indicate that what cannot be exceeded is the highest funding aid intensity defined in either set of the rules. So either the state aid rules or the Digital Europe program. So since the question is here, what will be the funding rate, maximum funding rate defined in the Digital Europe program, in particular the working program, explaining the conditions under which support will be granted for European digital innovation hubs. So in essence, there are two things you have to. Yes, you have to, from a state aid perspective, yes, the aid intensity applies to state aid. So normally, the remaining would have to be secured from private resources. In order not to crowd out private investment, we invite you to find as much as possible private co-investment as feasible. However, our state aid rules also have accumulation provisions, recognizing that digital EU funding is not as such state aid. It's public funding, but it does not qualify as state aid. And if the program, working program, applicable to support to European digital innovation hubs, will define a higher aid intensity level or funding intensity level than that addressed in state aid rules, that money may be used to top up the maximum amount of state aid that is allowed under our rules. I hope I was clear. In order also not to bore you with my voice, we decided with Elizabeth that we will take every other question. Yes.
Yeah, the first one to which probably I should answer is the most voted at this moment. How should market prices of non-commercial services be determined in the EDIH proposal? Now, in the proposal, we ask for the price list. So the list of all the services that hubs are going to provide to the companies. We need this list to verify how much is the state aid. Now, in some cases, the services provided by the Digital Innovation Hub will not have a real market price. If it is an area where there has never been support for digitalization, you probably don't have companies operating over there which already do this, and then you can check what their prices are. This is the reason why we are intervening, because there is a market failure. So in this case, the price that you will put there will be the cost that the Digital Innovation Hub will sustain to provide the service. If the service is test before invest, and you have to provide this service to bear the cost of renting the facility, of having 2 people for 1 week together with the customer to do the testing, to writing a report and doing some training and something like this, you estimate how much it is and you say, okay, test before invest on this specific technology will be 10,000 euro per experiment, and this will be your price list. If there is a market about this stuff and you can find a market price, then you will put the market price. I hope this is clear enough.
If I may come in at that point.
Please, go ahead.
I thought I've seen one question posted by Ingo, and I thought that this might maybe we might use that question to complement what Kasia just explained, because Ingo refers to operation aid, if I understood that correctly, and he also mentions Article 8 of the CHIBR, which is on accumulation rules. So as far as the question on operation aid is concerned, indeed, Article 27 allows for operating aid to be granted to the cluster operator. And as Kasia already explained, when it comes to the question, well, how much money can we use from the national envelope? How much money can we use from the DEP envelope? Do we still need private investments? It's Article 8, which is of relevance here. First message. Second message, we really invite you never to crowd out private investments. That's important. But as far as the rules, which are relevant, are concerned, you got the 50% ceiling or aid intensity in 27, applies for investments, but also applies for operating aid. And in addition, you have to apply Article 8, which indeed states that the relevant intensity of public funding is the one which is the highest, either in the state aid rules or in the corresponding commission work programs. So in your case, the DEP and work programs. This is the relevant intensity, funding intensity or threshold for you whenever you have to set up the financing.
Mm-hmm. If I may intervene, I think it would be good to clarify the difference between the operation of a cluster, and for the sake of the Digital Innovation Hub, the Digital Innovation Hub in the CHIBR are recognized as a cluster, so which is Article 27. So that is financing the hub versus what is the financing the innovative services for SMEs, which is Article 28. So maybe you could give a bit of an outline of the difference and the different principle which kicks in, because we also reflected that with a hub would stick no funding, and in that case the full funding, 50% public, 50% European, could even be passed on to the SMEs, proviso the 200K within 3 years.
Yeah. Well, to start with, we have to bear in mind that talking about 27, 28 CHIBR, it's really important to bear in mind that 27 CHIBR covers aid to the cluster operator, whereas Article 28 covers aid granted to SMEs benefiting from innovation advisory services. So you have to always, when you do the state aid assessment, you have to start with identifying the aid beneficiary. That's maybe the first step you have to conduct. Second, and Kasia, please come in.
I would just maybe add here, and then you can continue, that operating costs which are eligible, operating costs of a innovation cluster are specified under Article 27 of the CHIBR. So there are 3 categories of operating costs which can be supported by state aid, up to a 50% aid intensity. So it's not all operating costs, yes, that can be supported. And probably as if you if you deal with state aid rules, you know that the state aid community of experts, we consider state aid for operating costs the last resort, yes, as support for operational activities is considered as quite distortive, no? So I think experience has taught us that member states are also, we have had interpretation questions from our stakeholders about the categories of operating costs that can be considered as eligible under Article 27 of the GBER, and they are listed in the article, and you should check these categories when granting operational support for an innovation cluster. Yes. And I think, Elizabeth, I mean, as regards innovation, the type of costs incurred by SMEs which can be supported, we have two definitions laid down in our rules, which clarify what we consider as innovation support services and innovation advisory services. And our interpretation is, and we aim to clarify it in the future rules, that prices paid, in particular by SMEs, to access digital innovation hubs are considered as eligible under Article 27 of the GBER.
28 in also.
28, sorry. Yes, 28.
So that's the interplay in a way, 28, 27.
Okay, there is a general question I see from Francesca Ceccarini. What happens when the EDIH exceeds the total cost financed by the European Union and national funds? How can these extra expenses be covered? They can be covered by other regional funds or only by private contribution. Now, from the point of view of the European Commission, the funding will work in this way. Budget will be allocated to a hub. The hub will get yearly installments, and the budget is fixed. Once the grant is assigned, you have fixed budget, say $500,000 per year from the European Commission. Every year, the hub will present the budget. There will be a review, discussion of what has been done, and typically the budget will be approved. So the European Commission will pay the $500,000 of its budget. The other 50% is not our business from the European Commission web point of view. This means that it can come from national, private funding, and so on, but does not have to be justified. What happens if then, after 1 year, you find out that instead of supporting 100 companies as you expected, you have supported 200? Well, we are very happy, first of all. This means that the hub is working, but it's clear that the hub has to find a way to recover the costs. So one possibility is certainly to get further contribution, and I will ask to Elizabeth and Kasia to comment if this contribution from member state is possibly subject to state aid. What I want to say, I explain better. There are, for example, rich regions. I know in Italy some rich regions are rich. They have money available. So if hubs work well, they may say, okay, we will put more budget in it because it's useful for our environment, for our the environment of our region, and this money is well spent. So this could increase the budget of the hub. Another possibility is to have private contribution. A third possibility, which is probably the most simple, is to start asking the SME to pay. So if you offered services to SME for free, you can say, okay, I cannot support all these SME for free. I need more resources, more people. So I ask to the SME to pay 30% or 50% of the market price, which is still a good advantage, and the rest is paid through the public contribution. So this is how it will work. Now I ask to the colleagues from competition to comment what happens if a region or a national entity decides to increase the funding of hub from a state aid point of view.
It's, well, to start with, it's state aid relevant if funding is increased, and you have to, be it national funding, be it funding from a region, or even funding provided by local authorities, municipalities, not to forget about these. So it's state aid relevant, full stop. Second, you have to check if the requirements or the strengths of, for example, Article 27 CHIBR are still complied with, or if the maximum aid intensity of 50% would be exceeded in case you top up the funding.
I think here we cannot also forget about the key pillar in state aid rules, which is about state aid rules, state aid fulfilling the incentive effect. No, so we would, if you are topping up, you always have to be sure that relevant provisions on incentive effect are fulfilled. So that the activity, the application for aid takes place before the activity has actually started. No, so I think we don't know the exact case. No, and as our colleagues have mentioned in the previous session, and also the granting authorities, the devil is in the details. Yes, but I think Elizabeth has signaled that you would, of course, have to pay attention to the aid intensity, to the notification thresholds, and whether you are not, with this extra top-up, you are not violating the incentive effect provisions.
Okay, there is an interesting question from Anna Pajaron. How can a Digital Innovation Hub control what is the state aid received by SME benefiting from EDIH services? So the idea is that money coming from, subject to state aid is passed through the hub to the SME. What is the obligation of the hub in terms of control and checking? Eve, can you help me in this? I don't have a clear answer to this. Do the hub has an obligation to check the state aid, or do you know how to deal with this? Eve, we cannot hear you. You are muted.
I would say it's not about so much about control. It's not to the Digital Innovation Hub to control how much an SME receives in terms of state aid, because it could receive different aids like innovation voucher and so on that they could spend with another organization in the country. It's not so much about control, it's more
Well, it's more about we will never know. You must know that the internet provider of Eve is not so good, and is Tom, unluckily for us. So we have lost this. I will be happy to pass to the next question from Martin Duda. Would it be possible to provide some services only in the framework of digital financing, that is out of state aid rules? Because there are some services which are quite negligible in terms of volume and cost. For example, a 2-hour workshop, 1 hour of consulting, and so on. So it would make much more sense to have these services out of state aid rules to avoid any administrative burden. It will mean that this support should be reported as support only on the digital part of the European Digital Innovation Hub financing, and will not be necessary to make any bureaucratic thing to support these to explain the state aid rules. Is this acceptable? Kasia, Elizabeth, do you have any comment on this?
I mean, I would like. It's again. it has to be a transparent system, no? So innovation, advisory and support services, it's quite a wide catalog. And as long as an SME is given access to something at a price that deviates from the market, yes, for a service that is provided on the market, yes, is considered as an economic activity in our terminology, yes. So there are other providers, existing providers or potential providers that could provide this service. If you do not quantify it, identify it as a state aid, you risk having problems, yes. I mean, not only legal problems with state aid when state aid control will kick in, yes, but also possibly distorting the internal markets. I would it seems a bit for me it's not clear which services, why some services should be excluded from state aid radar, yes. I mean, I think that and why state aid in this case would actually be a bottleneck, yes, because I think it's possible to set up a support scheme which will be effective now in providing the support to necessary support to SMEs, while also respecting state aid rules. Yes, we are talking together with Comp Connect and with our external stakeholders to come up with a solution that will be a pragmatic one, yes, and will help SMEs in Europe. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we should think of designing a public intervention that is fixed at market failure, addresses the challenges, yes, that the policy was. That the created policy is to address, yes. So we should not forget about this overarching goal. So I would, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just to complement what Kasia said, we'd highly advise you not to, try to set up financial flows or to offer services in a way which would lead to a de facto circumvention of state aid rules. That's also a very basic and general principle you have to bear in mind. Any artificial setup, this would not stand when we conduct a state aid assessment. So rather be careful, because the more complex it gets, maybe you can describe it like that, the more complex it gets and you try to evade state aid rules, the higher the risk is that the setup would also be considered as an artificial setup. And again, as Kasia said, we wouldn't consider state aid to be a real bottleneck. We understand that it is often seen as an impediment. But in this case, offering access to SMEs to advisory support services, etc., there are options in the state aid rules, which are generous options also. So maybe do not spend too much time and energy on how you could circumvent or evade state aid rules.
Okay, thanks a lot. Before asking Yves to repeat what we lost from his previous connection, there is one general interest question. If it is possible to present some slides to show this in a structured way, because it is really hard to follow. Just to clarify, I graduated in physics, and I can assure you that quantum mechanics is nothing compared to this. Yes, it is hard to follow. we understand. We are perfectly aware. One suggestion is please have a look at the document European Digital Innovation Hubs in Digital Europe program, which you can download from the download section of this session, because there is a nice part, a nice chapter on state aid, which was written by our colleagues, and that tries to explain in the simplest possible way all this matter. Yves, up to you.
Yes, thank you. The question was from Anna Pajaron, where she was asking whether EDIs have to control the state aid received by SMEs. And what I was referring to is that it's not so much about controlling, but it is rather facilitating SMEs to understand state aid rules. That is, at the end of the day, the responsibility for controlling how much an SME has received in terms of state aid will not be with the EDI. It will be with the SME, because the SME can receive a number of other subsidies in the form of innovation voucher, for example, and therefore they have to clearly account for what they have indeed received at the end of the 3 years. And it is a rolling 3 years, by the way. So therefore, the role of the EDIs here is more facilitate. Make sure that an SME, if we have 10 people, it's pretty clear that they have no time to invest in looking at all of that. Have a look at help them, support them in making sure that they have compliance with the reporting obligation. Help them with this. So that's a bit the kind of facilitation, of simplifying the life of SMEs in complying with this. And 200,000 euro is over 3 years for a very small enterprise is actually something which makes a huge difference, and it's still within the limit. So this can be also seen as quite generous. And I would like to make a transition with one of the other questions, which is asking whether an SME can receive 200,000 in de minimis aid plus 200,000 in subsidized innovation services. Maybe Kasia or Elizabeth, you want to clarify this point.
I mean, de minimis is different from the 2000 threshold referred to in Article 28 of the GBER. Yes, so the minimis regulation also says that you cannot use. So you would still have to check the eligible cost. No, that. The SME received the minimus support for earlier, yes, and my interpretation is that you should avoid that the minimus threshold is used to circumvent the thresholds, yes. So that have been set out under state aid rules. Notably specific GBER provisions. So it's not, to summarize, the 2000 threshold referred in Article 28 is not a de minimis threshold, yes? So it's de minimis, on the other hand, regulation allows you to grant 200,000 support for without, okay. For any kind of for any activity, yes, providing the amount is capped at 200,000. However, there are also rules that you cannot use the minimis threshold to circumvent. Yes, so if you know you already for example, your entity, your SME got innovation aid under Article 28, you cannot use then the de minimis threshold to circumvent the okay, it's a wrong example, since now I'm going in circles a bit, because Article 28 allows you to grant 100% support 100% of the eligible cost, no? So the costs incurred by SMEs when receiving innovation advisory and support services. So if you have properly verified that this 200,000 is going for innovation advisory and support services, there is no need to give more, because you would be covering more than 100% of costs. Yes, so in a way, it's not the same compatibility basis. Yes, so the minimis regulation is a regulation. And this 200,000 threshold, even though it is the same threshold as in the de minimis regulation, is not considered as such as de minimis aid, yes? But there is no room, I think, for accumulating de minimis support with this threshold, since you can go up to 100% under Article 27. If you are to combine the minimis support with other form of support, for example, regional aid, yes, let's say, then you cannot use the de minimis threshold to go above the aid intensities defined in the in regional aid rules, for example, yes. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe here it would be helpful if member state describe to us the accumulation scenario that they are considering.
Mm-hmm. So yes, not, yes. If I am an SME, then the answer is there is no cumulative effect of innovation and support services.
So I mean,
but there could be other services which would then be bound to the de minimis aid, other than the innovation services, which could actually be taken into account in the de minimis aid. Yes. It will be not fully cumulative, but somehow there is a possibility to increase slightly the aid intensity.
But not for the, I mean, I would say not for the same eligible costs, yes? So the fact that somebody got de minimis, an SME in the past got de minimis, yes? Mm-hmm. For costs which are not linked to the innovation advisory support service, then you don't have to worry about the de minimis threshold. But mm-hmm. But you cannot use the de minimis aid to, exceed the support you are giving to an SME for innovation advisory and support services, if it clearly goes for the same eligible costs. Yes.
Yes, it's very clear when it is for the same. There is no cumulative effect.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So, from the perspective of the aid beneficiary, of this SME, for example, if this SME got at some point innovation aid under 28 cheaper because some services were offered below market price. So if this happened in the past and now this SME is in a situation to apply for de minimis aid. In this situation, of course, the SME has to submit the de minimis declaration to the aid granting authority. And when doing that, when filling in the form, the de minimis form, the SME does not have to mention the aid it once got under 28 cheaper, because that's not labeled de minimis. Maybe that also clarifies the situation a bit. Mm-hmm. Or the way.
Yeah, very good. Maybe there is a question where also Sandro can help here. The question is, what is the price list for, and how does that work with the not-for-profit rule, and how to guarantee the not-for-profit rule? And the question goes on by saying, what does contractually mean that all state aid should be passed on to the SME and certain public sector organizations? So does it refer only to the national funding? Is the national funding considered as received?
Yes, the price list is very simply is to check what is the value that has to be considered state aid. So it's a list that we need to evaluate that all the services provided by the hub to SMEs during 1 year have been valued at a certain amount. Otherwise, we would have no clue to understand if to control, let's say, the state aid. How does it work with the no profit rule? The no profit rule is different. It's something for the hub itself. So the hub cannot make a profit. If you are a partner of the hub and you are working in it, you cannot gain money from what you do. You can cover your costs and that's it. Stop. So the no profit rules means that whatever the hub will do cannot go in the pocket of somebody working for the hub. You will pay the salaries, you will pay the normal expenses, for the hub itself. I think it's a clear, very clear distinction. So the price list means that I provide services to an SME. The service that I provided is valued to €1,000. That €1,000 will be controlled and will go under the GBR regulation to verify that there is no too much state aid which would distort the market. On the other side, the hub, which itself provides these services to the SME, is an entity which has an economic account of, let's say, as expenses, as incomes, and can never make a profit. So basically, if they get money and they don't know how to do it, they can only reuse the money inside the hub itself. I don't know if I was clear enough, probably not, but it's the best I can do.
Kasia, Elisabeth, you want to complement?
No, I think it's sometimes difficult to maybe provide targeted guidance on basis of general, questions. So I think also approach us after this event with some specific case examples. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a plea to submit case examples.
Yes.
And therefore, on that basis, you will be able to give a bit more guidance on what is possible and what is reaching the limit. There is another question which from Ingo Henny, who is refining his previous question, which says that, so regarding Article 7, in combination with Article 8, so you already answered a part of the question, a maximum public funding of 50% is set. As Article 27 sets 50%, and digital sets 50%. So another 50% of operational costs have to come from the private sector. So here I assume we are going back to the question of is the 50% of the 50%. So 50% comes from the European program digital. 25 would come from the public funding, and 20 is this again an obligation that the other 25% for operational costs have to come from the private sector when we combine Article 27 and Article 8 of the Global Block Exemption Regulation?
Well, I'd say it's highly recommendable that you try to have some private investments in there. The rules, as they are, require that first, state aid does not exceed 50%. So it's not obligatory that you only have 25% of national or regional envelopes when it comes to the funding of the cluster operator. That's the 50%, which is in Article 27. That's the maximum when it comes to national funding, structural funds, etc. Funding which qualify as a state aid.
But I think you have to identify your eligible costs. No, so if we are speaking of investment or aid to an granted to an EDIH as under Article 27, so investment aid for innovation cluster, your eligible costs are the investment aid into tangible and intangible assets, and there you see how these eligible investment costs are financed. So 50%, and as we know the rules as they currently are drafted, could come from the Digital Europe program, yes. And now you would, let's say it's a scenario, the other 50% would come from state aid, from national budget, and would be state aid. Now, the state aid contribution would meet the state aid rules because it is capped at 50% of eligible investment costs. Now, what to do, how to qualify the Digital Europe program funding? It's not state aid. Because it's not these are not national resources. These are EU resources. So it does not it falls outside of state aid qualification. However, as the participants of this session have correctly noted, yes, there are accumulation rules that need to be respected. And Elizabeth explained that money from Digital Europe program are considered as public funding. So cumulation rules on state aid cumulated with other sources of public funding say that the total public funding included state aid, yes, and the DEP program money cannot exceed the most favorable funding rate or aid intensity rate, yes, defined either in the state aid rules that are applicable to the case. So the case we are discussing is investment support for innovation cluster, so it's 50%, or a funding rate defined in the DEP program for the same type of intervention, for the same type of eligible costs. So if the working program established under the Digital Europe program will say that support for an European Digital Innovation Hub, investment support for a European Digital Innovation Hub may be granted up to 65%, yes, or 70%, you may, according to the state aid cumulation rules, you may top up the state aid contribution with DEP money to the amount specified in to the aid intensity or funding rate, yes, specified in the working program of Digital Europe program. If no such maximum rate is defined in the Digital Europe program, then you will have to stick to the aid intensity defined in state aid rules. If you are applying Article 27 at 50%, so it means the remaining will have to be secured from private sources, from a loan, from own resources of the beneficiary, from a co-investor, private co-investor.
Yes, Kasia, if I may add to this, that so the funding rate in Digital Europe program is also 50%, so that's the same as the state aid level. But the idea is really that through the price list and through the fact that the state aid will be transferred to the SMEs, that the whole grant at the end will be used, will be transferred to the SMEs that you have served, and therefore there would not be a problem anymore with the Article 27, because the state aid of the SMEs with Article 28, the innovation advisory services, it's 100%, and that's exactly the purpose of the price list, to be able to make this transfer from the total grant to what is the value that the SMEs have received. So that at their level, at the level of the SME, it is possible to accumulate all the funding that they received through innovation advisory services and to check whether this is not more than 200,000 over the last 3 years. That is the whole principle that we are using, and that should normally work and make everything very reasonable.
Yes, so if this is I think because from the questions I can see that member states may have different funding scenarios in mind, no? So indeed the scenario that we have been discussing was about transferring the support down to SMEs. So so supporting SMEs in accessing the services offered by digital innovation hubs. So Article 27 as such could come into play if there was, we don't want to advocate for this kind of scenario, but if any aid remained at the level of the Digital Innovation Hub, then there would be a possibility to resort to Article 27, providing that the support would meet, all the compatibility conditions. So this is kind of a safeguard, yes, in this funding setup to ensure that to cover for situations when not the whole amount of aid is transferred to the SME. So our guidance is more detailed now in the documents that we have worked on, because I think it has to be emphasized that in the transfer mechanism, when the EDIH will be responsible for channeling the support to SMEs, I mean, they will take on the responsibilities of a granting authority. So, I mean, we cannot escape this, recognizing this, no? So, EDIH will have a double responsibility. It will be operating the innovation hub, but it will also be a granting authority, and it will be responsible for verifying that state aid conditions are fulfilled, no? So, but I think you can set up an efficient monitoring, reporting, verification mechanism, yes, that will help at the end SMEs in Europe, because, yes.
Yeah.
There is a very practical question specifically on this Article 27, which is therefore the aid to the operation of an EDI, and 28, which is innovation advisory services to SMEs. The very practical question is the following: is in the proposal, should there be different work packages for activities which falls either under 27 or under 28, so that it will already be known which will be the application of either of the costs, and therefore would clarify already at the level of the proposal? Is that something for the proposal stage, Amari?
No, I think this is important because, I mean, we mentioned this with Elizabeth, one of the requirements, general requirements to find state aid legal is that it has incentive effect, yes? So a member state needs to apply for support before the activity takes place. Because otherwise, the logic behind this requirement is without it, you may put into question the necessity of state aid support, yes? That it is supporting an activity which nevertheless would take place. So I think, yes, but it's also like, going to a bank, getting a bank loan. You need a private, no funds. You need to go present a business plan. You need to clarify for what kind of activities you want the support for. And the same thing with public financing, no?
Okay, Kasia, thank you very much. It was a hard session with a lot of information given. We have to close down even because in 8 minutes some of us have another one. Just one thing, somebody asked where to ask question. In the chat in this moment, I am putting the email address, connectdih@ec-europa.eu. Please don't say tomorrow because we will not have the answer. Wait a little bit for us to do our homework. And I mean, when we get close to the opening of the call, we hope to have more clarity on this complex matter. So I think we should close now. Thank you very much to everybody, and have a nice final session of the event. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Kasia and Elisabeth.